I'm back. I hope you don't get sick of me.
And what if we do?
Yeah, I know. There's nothing you can do. Well, at least I have a real doctor here, so we can talk about sickness. But what I realize is not only do I have to recruit speakers, I have to recruit people to interview the speakers. But it's actually my pleasure because David is an amazing friend for many, many years. But Dr. Agus is also a world-renowned oncologist, scientist, entrepreneur, journalist, author, and I'm honored to be with you here today. And you've also, over the years, taken care of so many of my friends. But he's also the founding CEO and director of the Ellison Institute. And before we talk about the Ellison Institute, I think, again, for those of you who haven't had a chance to read about Dr. Agus, just scan the QR code. You'll get his whole bio. And we will have opportunity to have questions again. So this is going to be in your Slido 9 Atom. So please do click on that if you want to ask questions, and I'll be monitoring your questions. But David, you do a lot. And so I just wanted to ask you, what's a typical day for you like, given the fact that we see you on TV, we read your books, and we know you're also running this institute, which is now thriving?
Well, first of all, I'm the most boring person in the world. I get up at 4:30 or 5, and I write in the morning. I work in the morning with the dog when nobody can bother me. I work out every single day. I had a back issue a year ago and kind of realized you miss one day, you go backwards. And as we all get older, we have to do that. And then I see patients at the Institute. I've got a large team of researchers, AI here and elsewhere. And, it's a privilege. When you see people dying of cancer on a daily basis, you don't stop working. And so what drives me is the fact that I'm failing, is that my patients, in general, will pass away from the disease, and I have to do better. And so it pushes myself and my team. We designed the Institute so all the walls are glass, because I want the patients to see the researchers working. That's hope personified. And then the other way around, the researchers see the patients, and they double down on their efforts.
And, can you tell us, that's amazing, and I think you've probably oversimplified your day, even though it starts at 4:30, which is amazing. But tell us about the origin story of the Institute. And, I know you've grown it, and I'll ask you specifically also about Oxford, but, kind of how the origin of the Institute started, because you've worked at these top institutions, and now you set something up that's completely unique.
I was a professor at UCLA and Cedars-Sinai, and then there were state budget cutbacks that happened in the late 2000s, and my institute was going to be affiliated with another Northern California institute, and then Eli Broad, who was just mentioned, stepped in and arranged for us to move to USC, and we did very well. And at one point, Larry Ellison, who I got to know through I took care of Steve Jobs, his best friend, Larry said, "How could you scale what you're doing? What's your dream?" I said, "My dream, very akin to what you just described with the California Institute, I want a place where mathematicians, physicists, engineers, chemists could all work on cancer." And he said, "How much for the building?" And I gave him a number, and he goes, "Done." And we were able to transition to a nonprofit, autonomous institute affiliated with USC and the University of Oxford, but we're a separate nonprofit where we can make decisions like that, move very quickly. Academic universities are amazing, but part of the reason you guys established the California Institute is you needed to move at a different speed than universities can move to translate things, and that's what we did here. And so the Institute opened about 4.5 years ago. It's been doing great. We have clinics and the labs all together in one place. So Gary was alluding to, there are no silos. The physicists are right next to the cancer patients and vice versa, and it works.
And I've been to the Institute. It's really remarkable what David and his colleagues have set up. And in terms of the Oxford component and the European kind of expansion, can you give us a little bit of background about how that came to be?
So during COVID, we worked a lot on global health and worked with the EU and the UK. And very quickly, we realized that the team at University of Oxford were remarkable in terms of they developed their own vaccine. So the most used vaccine in all of COVID came from the University of Oxford, not a pharmaceutical company. And they really were pushing the boundaries globally, and we started to work with them. And it kind of became very apparent that funding there was even worse than here. So to set up a separate institute at University of Oxford that did things different than we do, so they don't do cancer, They do AI for large models. They're doing plant biology. They're doing things that we aren't doing. Really brought a whole new dimension to our work, and they've been fantastic to work with.
What do you think is different about the kind of UK? I mean, we have a lot of people from the United Kingdom here in the audience as well. What is different that you imagine, even like in academia there?
There's much, in the United States, people move institution to institution every couple of years. If you're at a company, you're recruited 2 years down the road. There's much more institutional loyalty in the UK, and I love that. And so the people who work with us can be there for decades rather than years, and that makes an enormous difference in what they're doing. They created a lot of core resources as a country. So the UK Biobank is probably the most important data set for cancer. And so having assets like that are critical. For a while, we built core assets like the Cancer Genome Project here in the United States, but we kind of stopped investing in them. And, we've been going sideways in that regard.
And then in terms of the entrepreneurship that you envision coming out of the Ellison Institute, what's your process? How are you all thinking about the discoveries that might come out of the work that's being done and how to potentially eventually commercialize that and bring it to the world?
I made a drug for breast cancer that's presently on the market. It took me 10 years to make and 7 years to test. In the last 5 months, I've made 6 drugs with AI, and it is wild. I say, hey, here's a protein. I want to design something that binds right here on the protein. Here's every other protein in the body. I don't want it to bind to those. And with those constraints, we can make it. And so we're making drugs. We can do clinical trials at the Institute, and we've set up networks. The Gates Foundation gave us an award to build a clinical trial infrastructure for Africa in the cloud. And that same concept is kind of wild. That started in Africa, then coming here, we're building here. So we can take things literally from the lab to the clinic very quickly and do it. And everybody at the Institute works on that same project. So we have 2 drugs that will go into the clinic in the next year, and then 2 the following year. And everyone at the Institute is working on one aspect of that, while building new model systems. We do whole organs. So we take organs that were ineligible for transplant, and we can keep them alive for a week and test human drugs against a liver, against a kidney, rather than doing it in mice studies and building all these dimensions to develop drugs at record pace because we need them. And with AI, it is wild the speed at which we can do things.
No, it's incredible, and actually, Gary Michelson's been talking about this for a long time. How can we move from the reliance on animal models and testing to using technology to kind of bypass that? Because it seems that we're kind of still stuck in the dark ages, even though obviously even 30 years ago we thought we had progressed so much. If you think about, I know you weren't there in the morning, but we had some interesting comments when we were talking about investing in biotechnology and life sciences. And there was a comment about regulatory barriers. And if we could just prove safety, could we allow then the market to kind of sort out whether we would approve something or not? Because we're kind of on the bench. We leave a lot of things on the bench. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think that might be,
There was a Nobel laureate economist named Gary Becker, and he and I wrote a piece in Business Week. If you remember that magazine, you're old enough to remember it. Literally 20 years ago, suggesting that. Because in the beginning of the FDA, that's what happened, right? It was only about safety, and efficacy was determined by the real world.
Right.
Instead, we flipped it in the United States, right? The day you stop collecting data in a clinical trial and submit to the FDA, 100 patients, 1,000, maybe 2,000 patients, is the day you stop collecting data, and that makes 0 sense. So the notion of getting things for a very narrow indication to the market and then letting real-world evidence guide how we use them is going to happen, and is happening. The current regulatory environment is actually promoting that and talking about that. It's a lot of talk. We got to get it to real action, and that's difficult to do. Right now when you do a clinical trial, you have to take the data. A human, do you remember those people? Have to take something and then literally put it on a piece of paper and then enter it into a computer in electronic data capture, the clinical trial software. And then the day the trial's over, they take that software, they print it out, and a truck delivers 100,000 pieces of paper to the FDA. Well, shouldn't it be that at the end of a clinical trial, you just give the username and password to the software to the FDA, and day 0, they could start doing it rather than taking 9 months to enter the data? Shouldn't it be that the data elements are tied to the electronic health record? So literally, when you see the patient, it goes right into the electronic data capture. Clinical trial costs come down dramatically, time to approval and review. All the statistical package are there. They click X, Y, and Z, and they can analyze it every way they want. That's the way things have to go. We are living in an archaic industry where literally all of the FDA is coded in a computer language called COBOL that you're probably too young to have ever even learned. But unfortunately, I learned when I started programming. And there are so few COBOL programmers in the world that you can't update that software. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I'm shocked how much healthcare, even though the science has progressed so much, the mechanisms of practical healthcare are so archaic. But if you look at like security or military advancements, you get your facial recognition and people know everything about you. But you go to a doctor's office and the doctor says, well, this is what I think. And we're not relying on, I mean, I think it's all going to change because actually this conference has reinforced that for me, that we are on the precipice of things moving faster, but we need the policy component to move along with it. And as we were thinking, I'm thinking about the Ellison Institute. We were just talking about CIII. By the way, that's our abbreviation for the California Institute because
it just rolls off the tongue.
It's a mouthful.
CIII.
But we need to move at the pace of industry, not at academia. Academia is remarkable.
Well, but remember, pharma industry doesn't move that quick either.
Yeah, of course. No, I just mean maybe even technology industry.
Technology would be great.
Yeah.
No, I love that. But you think about it, you and I see patients. When we put things in electronic health record, that's a bag of words. So for the first time now with large language models, we can convert it to structured data. And I'm sure you saw it 2 weeks ago at Kaiser, they showed that the shingles vaccine reduces Alzheimer's and cognitive disorders by 52%. Nobel laureates missed it. The greatest neurologists in the world didn't do it. Pharma didn't see it. But a large language model figured that out by converting these bags of words to structured data. That's a whole new era.
Yeah, because when we first started using the electronic health record at UCLA, it wasn't really an electronic health record. What it was just a repository of like PDFs, essentially.
So you could bill appropriately and show, hey, there's that PDF, therefore I should be paid $6.
Right, exactly. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I think we have some audience questions regarding that too, is you've written books on basically healthy lifestyle. You've talked about this in your journalism. I recall like reading some of your content, and I was thinking, what David's saying makes a lot of sense. It's like sleep, eat healthy, exercise. What are the kind of life lessons, if you will, from some free consultation? There's no HIPAA here, in terms of like, what are the things that you think are most important? Because we had sessions in the morning about health span. And what are the basic things that you think people can do every day in terms of their health span?
All right, so first of all, it's tune out the noise. You are going to hear in every strip mall in LA, you can go in and be injected with a stem cell, a supplement, a peptide, you name it. Tune out all of that. None of them have been shown to work, or they would be standard in what we do, and they haven't been yet. And there's potential for significant harm. The key is we have some things that work, right? We know that statins dramatically make you live longer, reduce cardiac disease, reduce the overall incidence of cancer, and reduce cognitive decline by about 5-6 years. You put all that together, that's profound, yet most people don't take that. Vaccinations, shingles vaccine we just alluded to, 6% of people in the United States who are eligible for it get this vaccine. If 100% got it and we had a half decrease in Alzheimer's, what would that do to our economy, our life, our family? It would be dramatic in that regard. This administration, some things are, the vaccine stuff, obviously I don't agree with. I don't think anybody in this room does. But the real food stuff I do. And getting away from processed foods makes all the sense in the world. We have to do it on an economic basis so everybody can do it will be critical. But one of the greatest things AI will do is make care equal. Somebody comes to see Eric Esrailian at UCLA, they're going to get remarkable care. But in most places, they don't get to see an Eric. And AI will start to equal care across the country. And I think that's going to be exciting and profound. And I wrote a piece in November in the Wall Street Journal basically saying if we can stay healthy, you and I, for the next 3-4 years, we're going to be able to add a decade onto our life with AI. And I believe that, whether it's a new medicine, whether it's a humanoid. You know, someone was saying to me, you know, well, robots are going to dehumanize us. I go, it's the opposite. My nurses, if I look at their day, 60% of their time is spent on documenting what they did and getting supplies to do what they have to do. They could be followed by a humanoid who will document everything they do, and they could spend 100% of their time with their patients. My mother is 85 years old. I'm worried every time she gets up at night to go to the bathroom, a humanoid will walk her to the bathroom and make sure she doesn't fall every single night, and she can walk the dog where she doesn't have to worry that a squirrel's going to come and that dog is going to pull. She loves to cook. It will shop for her, prep for her. She cooks and it cleans up. We're entering a new era where instead of having to hire a human health aide to sit in your house and literally for 5 minutes an hour help you and the rest of the time stare at the wall, where we can all be taken care of, which I think is going to enable us to live much longer and better.
That's amazing. And Peter Diamandis was talking earlier. We was talking about the optimistic view of the future, which is the humanoid robot is helping you and not hopefully harming you in the future. One of the things we talked about earlier today was also sleep. One question from the audience was about fasting. What are your thoughts about fasting in general? And I think you mean perpetual fasting, just like even intermittent fasting.
You fast too long, you fall over. Intermittent fasting has been shown not to be valid as a way of performance or of losing weight. What matters, and all the data show, it's very simple. And the funny thing is, people don't like simple things. They like things that are complex and hard to do. The simple is, you have to choose, I'm a 2-meal-a-day person or 3, doesn't matter which, but you stick to it, and then fast in between your meals. The kitchen cabinet didn't exist till 100 years ago, so we as humans weren't made to graze. We're made to have a meal and then another meal and nothing in between. And that way, the stress hormones, insulin, cortisol, come down and they come back up. One snack, no matter how healthy in a meal, can throw off your metabolism and your performance, academic and athletic, for 2 to 3 days. So as simple a thing as just every meal, the same time, and nothing in between, you will do better and feel better. But we're a funny country, right? We say you could do whatever you want. You could be as large as you want. You could sit all day. You can smoke. And then by the time you turn 65, we'll pay for all the healthcare ramifications of your behavior. Kind of funny that that's how we approach things. We have to do things like Singapore and others do, which say you have to take responsibility for your behavior.
Well, I'm going to summarize a couple of questions into one, which you just mentioned it. It's kind of like the way that we incentivize people or disincentivize them in this country. If you had to change one thing about kind of maybe a policy component, whether it's about payment or reimbursement or insurance, just one thing that you think, if you could wave a magic wand, is there something that comes to your mind that would be like Dr. Agus would do that tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, there are two aspects. One is I would make it so that we have the technology to basically protect your data privacy, but use it for public good. The notion that every time you and I go to the doctor or we see a patient, that data doesn't improve care tomorrow makes no sense, right? We have this, trove of data on every patient that's seen, and we can use that to improve patient care. So figure out a way to liberate the data. But number two is to bring back responsibility, as we alluded to healthcare, right? Why should the non-smokers subsidize the smokers? Why should the people who take care of themselves have to pay these crazy insurance premiums because people who don't? In the United States now, 21% of corporations of their expenses are for healthcare. And that has to change. We have to figure out a way to improve the health of our country and incentivize people to be healthy.
Fantastic. And then one kind of wrap-up question. You talked about the Ellison Institute and the origins around cancer. We've talked about also the CIII. We're looking at immunotherapy and immunology. What do you think is a kind of a pro and con approach of focusing on a specific area of a disease versus kind of focusing on more of a kind of basic element?
I think there's no con.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the first drug for HIV, AZT, come from oncologists because they had the ability of checking cell lines, and this was one of the drugs they were looking at. Mm-hmm. So what you find is when you go deep in an area with multidisciplines, you get orthogonal benefit to other areas. So what you're going to learn, I'm so excited because the CIII is literally down the street
Right,
from the
of
Ellison
course.
Institute. So we're neighbors, which I love. But what you're going to find is a discovery there will help one aspect or another disease unrelated. And we see that all the time. You get smart people together from different disciplines, good things happen.
Well, thanks for everything you do, David. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you all again. You're going to get a break from me.
Thank you.